Good morning, or good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. How's everyone's day going so far? I have a family of baby blue jays in my backyard, and one is chilling out in my window well. I don't think he's stuck. He's just taking a little nap. Because they can kind of fly. I've been watching them pretty closely. There are 4 of them. Hi, Sunny. So today, I was having trouble picking what we were going to do today, so I thought maybe you guys could help me. I'm thinking we could either do some of these dice roll landscapes that I do sometimes make videos about, and some of the results. Yeah, I've been loving the Blue Jay family. This is some of the things that I've painted with those, so we'd be doing some landscapes, and I've already got the dice roll stuff set up. Or I've been getting a decent number of questions recently on color mixing, and then also people having some troubleshoot or like issues with watercolor. So I thought you guys can help me decide which one you want to do. So vote in the comments and let me know. Dice roll. Okay, we got 1 for dice roll. 1 vote for dice roll. I'm gonna make a little thing here. Dice, 1. Got 2 for dice roll. Okay, I'm trying to write with a pen that has no more ink left. All right, we got 2 for dice roll. Anybody else want to chime in? We've got about 2 more minutes that I'll take votes, and then we will get to actually doing whatever we decide on. Anybody have any fun plans for today? 3 for dice roll. Depending on when my grandma goes. My grandma's getting a puppy today. She's gonna get a little Sheltie. I'm so excited. She's been wanting to get a puppy for forever. And I'm gonna be very involved in this puppy's life because it might become mine one day. Got another one for dice roll. Tacos. Oh my goodness, tacos are always a fun plan. All right, dice roll is definitely winning. If anybody else has anything else they want to do, you might want to vote. Otherwise, it looks like we're going to be doing dice roll. Town block party. Oh, that's so fun. So she thinks there are 2 puppies she's going to decide between. One is a male and one is a female. And she's leaning towards a female, and she wants to name it Lily. All right, we got 5 for dice roll. No, nobody's voting for anything else, so I have a feeling that's what we're going to be doing today. Got 1 more minute where we take... The dice roll ones are kind of fun, and since I was having a hard time deciding what to do, they are a fun way to paint without having to make any decisions. Oh, all right, we got some last minute votes in for color mixing. Dice roll is still winning. I'm going to give you guys 30 more seconds in case there's anybody else wants to chime in. And then we're going to get started. The other thing we can do is if you guys have any requests for specific palettes for me to use, I can do that. All right, I think we're doing dice roll today. So I'll get the dice out. So palettes I have are, this is my palette. I have the Stuart Simple Colorist Color one. I have Koi. I have Winsor Newton Core. What else do I have? I've got Prang. Maybe we'll do a little bit of mine, a little bit of Koi. All right. let's get started. So I'm going to be painting, I think I'm going to paint in this little notebook here. And here's my very terrifying painting from the other day. I'm going to set this up. I'm going to be doing 2 on this one. So I'm going to actually go ahead and tape off 2 different little cells here. Unicorn and koi. So yeah, we'll do at least 2 of these. And I'll do unicorn food on one of them, and I'll do koi on the other one. Let me find my koi palette. Where is it? Where is it? Okay. And here's my koi one. What kind of watercolor paper do I recommend? I've got... My recommendation is to find cold press paper that is at least 140 pound or 140 pound paper, which is 300 GSM in case you are not in the US. And my best advice for it is pick paper that you're going to use. You know, if you're going to buy Arches and just let it sit because it's so expensive, don't do that. Arches is wonderful. So is Fabriano's pretty nice too. There's like a student 300 pound if you want something nicer that's also pretty decently priced. But, you know, sometimes people buy all that paper and then they just let it sit because it's too nice to use. And then that kind of defeats the purpose. So, all right, I'm out of that tape, so we got to switch over to another one. I am self-taught. Yeah, see, you're too scared to open your Arches. I understand. I've got a bunch of Arches and I let it sit because it does feel like it needs to be something special, you know? It's a great paper. If you like using it, that's great. All right, there we go. I've got these. And today I'm using some washi tape. I use all sorts of tape. A lot of times I just use this very basic masking tape. This is just literally the cheapest. Sometimes I use Scotch tape. We have tested basically every type of tape on my channel, and they all work to varying degrees. So you bought paper that's glued, but you find it hard to separate. Oh, so you're talking about block watercolor, and I actually really like block watercolor because you don't have to tape it down, but it can be kind of tricky. You'll need a palette knife in order to kind of actually remove it from each other. Yep, a letter one would work too. So yeah, we've tested everything from like artist grade tape to drafting tape to frog tape, everything. I don't like frog tape, and then some of the drafting tapes are pretty good. Always gonna try to get out. I've got this, for those of you who are joining just now, I've got a family of blue jays. Oh no, he hit the window, but not hard. I think he'll be okay. He needs to go the other way. My window well, I've got a baby blue jay in my window well. And it has steps, so as long as he turns around, he'll be able to get out. So we're doing dice roll landscapes today. So here are my selections for what we can do. I'm gonna roll for 1 at a time. So let's roll first. Let's do 3 colors unless we need a 4th in case I get like 3 colors that just need a supporting color. So let's start with 1. So we've got green. Ooh, hopefully we get trees or something. Yes, washi tape from the dollar store. That's a great solution. 6, purple. Ooh, I like this already. I'm hoping we get something that will mix well with one of these though. Maybe like a yellow. We got green again, so I got to re-roll. Purple again. There we go, blue. Ooh. All right, so this is going to be a little tricky. What do you guys think? Should we stick with blue, purple, and green, or should we add one more in? So I like to kind of think about these little dice roll ones kind of as impromptu painting, and we can use them to, you know, try out a bunch of different techniques and then also kind of piece things together and keep it simple. All right, I think we're sticking with it. We got a decent number. One more. Oh, keep it. Yeah, let's see what the elements are, and then we will figure out if we need to add another one, because I think you guys are kind of split on that. So let's figure out what our sky is going to look like. We're going to be night. Okay, that works well with the purple and the blue. So we can maybe do this. Little dude, turn around. You can't come in here. All right. And then let's get at least one landscape element. Trees. Okay. Now, a lot of times I put the trees kind of as one of the last elements, so I'm going to roll for one more just in case I need to kind of build something that's a little bit further back into this. It really wants and hills. Okay. Trees and hills. Perfect. Okay. So we're going to start with, I'm going to be using my palette. Whatever palette you have is going to be totally fine for today. If you are using a dried pan palette, I recommend that you go ahead and wet your paints right now so they can kind of sit. I need to clean up this. Actually, I'm not using yellow, so it doesn't really matter. But I am going to clean out a couple of these wells, so I'm just going to spray a little water in there and then take some of my scrap. Ooh. This is an old paper towel that's dry that I was using, and I'm just going to clean these out. Quick little clean. Yeah, the birdie wants to paint. Yeah, if you just turn around, dude. There are 4 of them. They were all sitting on this rock the other day. They actually let me get kind of close. I didn't want to disturb them too much, but I wanted to take a picture, and they were very cute. And there's one of them that's very sleepy. They're almost full size. Their tails are just a little bit shorter now. So I use all sorts of different types of paints. I sell some handmade paints, and then I also sell these, which are manufactured paints. And then I use a bunch of different ones, partially because I want to make sure this is accessible to anybody, and everybody has different paints, so I use a whole bunch. Oh, if you want to see, okay, so if anybody has to leave, here, if you want a screenshot, here is the dice roll, what I'm going to be using. This is for something else if you wanted to do abstract stuff. So go ahead and take a screenshot. I'm going to take this away in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. All right, so we've got green, purple, and blue. It's a night with trees and hills. So I think this is actually nice and perfect. I actually think that we don't need another color necessarily. We can do this with the colors that we have on hand. I'm going to start by mixing up a nice kind of darker blue type color, and I'm going to be doing a gradient to a lighter purple type color, so it kind of looks like there's a little bit of dusk or a little bit of like haze. Maybe it's just after the sunset kind of a thing. So let's mix up 2 colors here. I'm going to put a little water in each of these. And I'm going to start with my blue. I'm going to grab a tester strip of watercolor so that I can test these colors as I go along. And I think I need to actually put a little more water in these. All right, so let's start. I'm going to grab, this is kind of like an ultramarine, and in my palette it's called Blueberry Muffin. So I'm going to grab some of that color and mix that in. And one of the reasons why I do tester strips when I am mixing colors up, so I usually just like when I'm cutting up my old paintings, you can actually see there's a little bit of paint here. I cut off the sides where there's nothing and just save the extra pieces in a little glass on here, because this looks like a pretty dark color, but when we actually put it on the paper, it's much lighter. So this gives me an actual idea of what it's going to look like, or closer to what it's going to look like when I do place it on the paper. Every paper reacts a little differently, but this gives me a better idea than just what's in the pan. I'm going to take a little bit more of this blue here. Maybe a little bit of this other blue, which is a phthalo type blue. It's called Blue Raspberry in my palette. Let's check on this again. So far pretty nice. I want it to be a little more pigmented, so I'm going to be adding a little bit more. I also think just to kind of bring it into the purple realm, and since I added in, let's add in a little more of this phthalo, because I want to mute this color a little bit. And since I can't use its complement to mute it, because I don't have that color within my range of colors that we talked about, I can use phthalo blue, which has a little bit of green in it, and then I can take a little bit of this purple color, and purple has some red, and since there's red and green, that will just barely mute all of this together just a little bit. Okay, let's see what we got there. Still need some more. I just want a little more pigmentation. And let's do this again. Realistic portraits, oh gosh, I'm not a huge, I know I did the really silly painting the other day of portraits, which were definitely not realistic, but you're gonna need to start learning something like grid, or you can do like a transfer drawing, just so you start to get the ideas of where things are. I used to do a lot more sketching. Oh, there we go. That's the color I want for my nice dark blue, but I haven't sketched in quite a while. In this one, I'm going to do the purple color. So I'm going to, we could go straight for purple, or we could mix it up. I think I'm going to actually go straight for purple, just to try to like actually stick to what it's saying. If you don't have a purple, but you do have a pink, I recommend mixing your purple with pink and blue instead of red and blue. I always find that it gives you a nicer purple. So let's just add in a little bit of this. I think the mom or the dad is above yelling at the little baby saying, "Get out here, come this way." And I think I'm going to keep it kind of light like this, because as we do this gradient, it's going to take some of this pigment into it. So it'll be a little bit darker, and I'm going to keep it about here. This is a night type sky. So for those of you who have never done a gradient, the way we're going to be doing this gradient, there's a couple different ways. If you don't like the Dripline technique, you could wet the entire area, and then just go ahead and kind of drop those colors in. But the one that I like to teach is called a Dripline technique. And what you need to do is you need your paper to be up at an angle. So you can see there's some space here, and you can either hold it, or if you have trouble holding things and painting, you can grab something and kind of just stick it under here so that you're going to have an angle, because we want gravity on our side. I think I actually want it to be a little bit higher, so I'm going to find something else to put underneath it. You're in an airport watching on mute. Nice. That means you probably cannot hear what I'm saying, but you know, there we go. All right, so I've got this at an angle. This is probably at like a 30-degree angle, something like that. And the Dripline technique, we're using gravity on our side, so we're going to fill our brush up with a bunch of this pigment. We're going to make a stripe across, and because it's at an angle, there's going to be a drip line along the bottom part of this. We're going to continue to refill our pigment, pulling it down, and then we're just going to start to switch over, refilling our brush with the other color to get the gradient. So here's how I'm going to start. I'm going to grab this dark blue color. I'm going to make a stripe across like this. Oh, did not have enough, so I'm going to refill this. I want to load this first drip line up so I've got enough pigment to actually make another stripe. I'm going to grab some more and swipe across, and maybe even more of an angle would be helpful. Then I'm going to start to switch over, so I'm just going to dip my brush into that purple lightly. We want to slowly interchange the colors that are in the brush. So now I'm dipping into the purple and just pulling this down. This is going to give us a nice gradient. This is one of those techniques that will be really helpful if you can master this, because it helps you cover larger areas. Then I want to preserve some of the foreground to be lighter so that I can see some of the tree elements and things like that. So I'm actually going to wash my brush off, and I'm going to tap it just so it's not going to be super messy, but I'm going to keep a bunch of water in my brush, and now I'm just going to pull this down using that water so it'll be lighter, because we're going to be kind of covering up parts of this with those hill elements and then also the trees, and this will mean that I won't have to be super duper pigmented and make this so dark. Then I'm going to dry my brush off by tapping it on a rag, and I'm going to suck up that extra water at the very bottom of the page just so it doesn't sit and move around unpredictably. And if you were to leave a bunch of water pooled there and then let it dry naturally, what's going to happen is it's going to actually create backruns, which are those really interesting textures. You can actually see it happened here. When I was doing my little testing, I left water, and you can see it starts to run. What happens is the paper dries at different time or at different rates, and the areas that are dry create borders, and then the pigment becomes attracted where it's wet to that border, and it creates something called a backrun. Tips for not streaking. So there's a couple things that could be happening with streaking. One, it can be your paper. Some of the papers are more prone to creating streaks. Two is you might be pushing hard with the brush. So when I am doing this, I am letting there's a bunch of pigment in here, and I am basically just connecting the pigment, not so much the bristles of the brush as I move down. If you do get a lot of stripes, you might be pushing too hard, because you might actually be kind of picking up the pigment and also depositing it. See how when I push hard, you can see some of that streaking? So it might just be a pressure thing. Try to let your brush, it's just like it's barely resting. It's just floating over the surface. Oh, of course. I'm happy to help. Yes, my page is all about trying to help people get creative and be a little more accessible. So I try to talk about all the things that oh my goodness, okay, sorry. There's a baby bird in my window well. It's a blue jay. I think he can get out, but the parent just came down and fed him something. Oh my goodness. The border is not necessarily called a backrun. The backrun is the thing that happens here. Yeah, or let's see. Nail polish I have on is a base blue called Sally Hansen Royal Hue, and then I use the Hollow Taco, one of their toppers. I don't remember which one it is though. Yes, yeah, I'm like really invested in this bird family, so if he's really struggling, I'll figure out a way to get him out, but I think he can get out. Okay. So I'm gonna let you guys, oh, he's on the wall, he's getting higher up. I'm gonna let you guys choose. I can either dry this and then we can continue working on this one, or we can roll and get started on our second one and kind of move between so you guys can kind of see. People work differently with watercolor. It kind of depends. Sometimes I'll work on one all the way through and dry kind of as I go. Or sometimes if I'm just feeling kind of distracted or want to paint a lot, I will do multiple pieces at the same time so I can kind of work between the two pieces, let them dry kind of on their own, and then there's less waiting. Roll. Okay, we're going to move between the two. There's enough votes for that. So for our second painting, let's get our colors. Let's see if the dice are still stuck on 6 and 3s. Okay, so first, oh good, we got, well, the second one is going to be, all right, there's my hair. Blue. I'm hoping for some bright colors. Come on, yellow. Nope. Orange. Oh, that's close. I'll take that. And yellow. Oh man, okay. You know, there's actually quite a bit we can do with blue, orange, and yellow because we can mix up like a gray type color to create some interesting things. I said I wanted brighter colors. I guess I got them. All right, now for the sky. Subtle sunset. That's actually perfect. Perfect, perfect. I feel like this one, the dice are on my side. Hello. Hi to the Philippines. I know you, I wish there were captions on lives. All right, landscape elements here, 6. So we're gonna do trees again, which is fine because we've got blue and yellow, so I can make some different colors. And water, okay. What do you guys think? Should I leave it with just trees and water, or should I roll for one more element on this one? Hi, Shirley. All right, we got a couple votes for leave it, a couple votes for roll. I'm gonna roll it one more time and let's see, because I think you guys are kind of split. Let's figure out. We got trees again. Oh no, maybe the dice are trying to tell me in a field. Okay, yeah, no, I cannot think of a good way to do a field, water, and trees. No, maybe I can. I don't know, what do you guys think? Field or no field? Hello to Oregon. We had a couple people who wanted it, and then a lot of no's. All right, no field. We're just gonna stick with the trees and the water for now. There's a chance, if depending on time, we might be able to kind of come back and revisit. Okay, so we've got a subtle sunset. This one I'm gonna do with the koi one, which is actually kind of perfect because then I can leave these other colors in here. And I do really like the koi one, but man, as you use it, it gets ugly. So I'm gonna wet these just to kind of give them a second to get it together. Hello to Monroe. And let's put this in here. I'm gonna wipe out at least this one portion here. So we've got blue, orange, and yellow. We're gonna be doing a subtle sunset. And let's actually do this one as a wet on wet exercise instead of doing a drip line type thing. I am going to start by, we do have some blue and I want a little blue. I'm going to challenge you guys here. So we're going to try to do on this one with a subtle sunset. Oftentimes when you look at the sunset, which just in case people are unaware, I am obsessed with the sunset. I moved back to Colorado for my family, but I feel like about 50% of the decision was because I wanted to see the sunset. I had lived on the East Coast where there are too many trees to see it. And I missed it so much. So that's one of the reasons why I paint these so much. When you look at a really subtle sunset, you're going to see a tiny bit of kind of blue up in the top, and then it's going to basically turn to white or a light color before some of those colors come back in. So what we're going to actually do is we're going to play a risky game right now. We're going to be placing blue down on wet, and then we're going to be adding in yellows and oranges. And the risk here is that those can bleed together and make greens. We don't want green skies. This isn't a tornado painting. So we're going to have to use water as a barrier, and we might also want to do a little lifting. So if you don't have a paper towel handy, I'm going to grab a clean one just in case I need it, because we're going to be kind of playing a dangerous game, but we can do it. We've got this. So I'm going to be grabbing my oranges, my orange and my yellow straight from this palette. So I'm going to make sure they're nice and wet, but I am going to mix up a really subtle light blue color to kind of start this at the top. So let's do that real quick. I'm going to put some water here. I don't need a ton of it because I'm really only going to put like 1 or 2 swipes in. But I do want a little bit. So I'm going to grab this, which is, I don't actually know what color this is. Maybe cobalt in this palette, or is this cerulean? Or is that cerulean? I don't know. Let's check this color. That's a nice color. Now, if we want to, I mentioned before where we were talking about muting colors. So this is a nice light blue, but it's also a really bright blue. And a lot of times when you're actually looking at the sky, it's not this blue. It's usually kind of like a softer, muddier color, just barely. And one of the ways we can do that is with complements. And we do have orange in this palette. So this one is blue, orange, and yellow. So I can. And if I'm going to do this, I want to be really careful. I'm going to take a little of this orange, just a teeny bit in my brush, and I'm actually going to tap it off over here so that I have better control over grabbing some of this. And this is actually more of a red leaning orange, kind of like a vermilion. So this is going to warm this up just a little bit, but I just want to take a teeny amount of this. We want to kind of sneak up on this color rather than shoot past it, or we're going to get a real kind of brown gray type color. So let's just check that. It's a little bit softer. I'm going to grab just a little bit more. Or sneaking up on it. Think of yourself as Elmer Fudd hunting rabbits. We have to be very, very careful. Just a little bit more. Yeah, Colorado does have a lot of flat parts, and I live on the plains. Just a little bit more. Okay. There we go. And see how much more kind of, even though this is still a pretty nice blue, there is just a little muting to that color, just a teeny bit. All right, so with a wet on wet technique, if anybody is brand new to watercolor, it's best to work with 2 cups of water. And the reason for this is for instances like this, where we're gonna wash our brushes off in the dirty water, but then if you have clean water, if we wanna do something like a flat wash, and you can do this with a normal brush, just a size 12, or you can use something like a flat wash brush like this, just make it go faster. Please make a video about hunting rabbits. But we want to dip whatever we're going to be painting with. We want a clean brush, and then we want to dip it into our clean water. And that's going to make it so that we don't inadvertently, whatever our dirty color is, kind of put some of that color in. So we're going to be working on wet now. Before we did wet on dry with that Dripline technique. And one of the reasons why I don't always do wet on wet is because it makes it harder to actually know what your values are going to be, because by pre-wetting this paper, it's going to naturally dilute whatever we put on top of it. So sometimes it's going to give us spectacular effects, but sometimes it can be a little bit harder to know. So I'm going to put a nice coat of water over this, and this is going to depend on your humidity level. If you live somewhere that's really humid, it's really dry in Colorado, you might need less water and it might take longer for it to dry. After you do this, you want to find a light source. See how I can get kind of the reflection here. If your water is moving all around, like you can see, well, I don't know if you can see it, but there's some that's moving all around for me. So I'm going to take a dry brush and I'm going to kind of just soak up a little extra. We want it to be nice and wet, but we don't want it to just move everywhere on us. So I'm going to grab a little bit of that water. And then, as I mentioned before, the top of this sky is going to be blue. So I'm going to take some of this blue and I'm just going to put this here. I just want this to kind of be subtle. I'm just going to drop that in here. And then I want to create a barrier, a water barrier between my oranges and my yellows. And orange is going to play a little nicer than the yellow with the blue. So I will probably transition to that blue, or to the yellow first. I've got a bit of a harsh line here, so I'm going to just kind of try to mix them together. I want it to be a subtle transition. And now I've got this nice kind of, I don't know if you guys can even really see the blue on my page in this live, but it's a very light blue up here. Then it goes to a lighter blue and then down into some water. Now, next I'm going to grab some of these oranges and I'm going to put them kind of right here with a little water. And let's start to put this on. This is on wet. So that was a little bit more than I actually bargained for. So I'm going to grab some water in my brush and let's lighten this just a little bit. We're going for a subtle sunset was what the dice said. I'm going to kind of move this around just to give it a little interest. And then I'm going to move into some yellows. I'm going to tap that off. I've got too much in my brush, but we're going for it. I'm going to put that there. And because this is on wet, we've got some time. We can mess with this just a bit. So we got trees and water. Now I'm going to be putting the water in the foreground. We'll take up the bottom third of this. I'm going to kind of use the rule of thirds for this composition. This is my very subtle sunset here. But I kind of want to reflect a couple of these colors down into the water right away, just so that they're in there. Maybe not so much the blue, but I'm going to put some of the yellow and the oranges down into here so that they'll just kind of be built in. A little more of that orange down over here and there. And then I'm sucking up that extra water by taking my brush and I tap it off on a rag off screen and I'm just grabbing that water. Okay, I think that'll be a really nice subtle sunset. Yes, so when you start with watercolor, you're gonna make mistakes. Things are not gonna go planned, but watercolor is actually more forgiving than we initially think it is. It seems like it's and it can be, oh no, I messed up, that's the end of it. But one of the reasons why I like showing these types of paintings is that we can be impromptu. So one of the things that's really fun for me about watercolor is adapting and just kind of working with what the watercolor is doing and learning to kind of harness that instead of fight against it. So if you make a mistake, things are too dark, you can lighten them. If things go in a slightly different direction than you planned, maybe just shift things over a little bit. It's going to be fine. So this right here is it's called a Reflections watercolor journal. I don't think it really has any brand. Oh, here we go. You can see that brand right there. And I think it's a 6x9. But yeah, I really like this notebook. It's not 100% cotton, but it does have a higher percentage of cotton than a lot of non-100% cotton papers. So you get some of them. And then the one I'm painting on, this bottom one, is Koi. And the one on the top is My Palette Unicorn Food. Wet on wet wabbits, yes. All right, so What we're doing here, in case anybody has just joined, is we are doing these dice roll paintings. So we used this, I rolled for them. The top one, we are only allowed to use green, purple, and blue. And the dice decided we would have a night sky with trees and hills. This bottom one, we got blue, orange, and yellow with a subtle sunset, trees, and water. So what we're going to do next is we're going to move back up to this one. This one should be pretty much dry by this time because we've done a bunch of other stuff. If yours is not dry, you are going to want to, before we move on to this next thing, because we're going to be making a layer on top of it. And if it's not dry, I'm actually going to kind of just, I think it'll be fine. If it's not dry, we're not going to be able to get definition in these layers. They're going to bleed together. So if you've got a hairdryer, you might want to use that, or you might be ready to go kind of like I am. So I'm going to switch back over to my other palette, and next I'm going to do hills. So we've got night, hills, and then I'm going to put trees in last, I think. So I've got green, purple, and blue. Let's see, I'm kind of thinking, let's move back to this darker blue color for our first layer of hills. One of the fun things about watercolor is because it's a mainly transparent medium and you use really light layers of it, we're going to be able to see the other layers through it, which is the reason why we actually brought that sky all the way down, because if we had a line where we stopped, we would see that line through every layer of the painting. Even once we added a bunch of colors, you'd still be able to see it. So we want to make sure that we have these nice smooth transitions where it won't be as disruptive to the eye as we move down. I'm going to be putting in hills here. So we're going to do a couple different layers. And even if I were to add some of these same colors on top of this, because it's an additive type color scheme, where we're going to be layering it on top, we'd be able to see it, but we might want it to be a little bit darker, a little bit lighter, that type of thing. I think I'm going to start my hills just by using the blue that I mixed up here. So I've got the blue that I mixed up there, still some of that. If you need some more, mix it up now. And I'm just going to kind of remix it. When it sits for a minute, some of it evaporates a bit, and it also just kind of like maybe starts to separate in some instances, so you might want to give it a good mix. And then I'm going to check this color really quick. We're going to be doing a bit of a gradient. So hills are not pointy, so I want to make sure this is kind of swoopy. And I'm going to make kind of the top line, and then I'm going to fill my brush with water and pull it all the way down. Because again, I'm trying to preserve some lightness in the foreground here so that when I place trees, I'll be able to see it. All right, so I'm going to, let's put in our first layer of the hills. Ooh, it was maybe a little darker than I kind of bargained for, but that's okay. Now I'm going to wash my brush. I've got water in there, and let's just soften this down. Now, if your first layer is a little bit too dark, before it dries, let's suck up a little bit of that extra, and it's okay. There we go. And I'm going to bring that all the way down because even though it's softened, it might kind of run up to that border and then create those lines. So there we go. It's my first layer of hills. I'm going to put in 2 to 3 layers of hills before I throw those trees in there. So yeah, we got to let that dry for a minute. And while we're doing that, I'm going to also tell you guys, if you don't like your sky, wait for it to dry, do another layer, and try to kind of just like move things around a little bit. Not necessarily move things around in what's in the background, so don't be scrubbing it. I mean, you can, but what I recommend doing is moving things around by just kind of fudging where you're placing some of those colors. Welcome to, Art TikTok. Art TikTok is a very, very lovely place to be. I love the art community here on TikTok. Okay, so what am I going to do next? I think we should continue to work on the hills on this one, so I am going to be using a hairdryer for just a second. If anybody is sensitive to noises, you might want to mute this for a second. I'm going to turn it on in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, that should be dry enough. I've got these stuck on the side of my desk so that they're not just on the ground anymore, but that makes the cord shorter. Found electrical tape. I mean, that might work. I think that might be one of the only tapes I have not tested. Well, welcome. I'm glad that you guys are here. July is actually watercolor month, and I'm thinking about remaking a lot of the initial TikToks I made like a year ago where we really went over the basics of watercolor. So if you're brand new here, stay tuned. I'm going to have a bunch of tips that broken down in little like one minute segments. And then we do lives here pretty much every other week. All right, I'm going to do another layer of these hills. I'm going to use that same color. And I'm going to demonstrate a couple things here. So I mentioned the thing about the line, and I can actually show you what happens. So if we have a line in this, and let's say we want our second layer of hills to go above this, we're actually going to be able to see that line a little bit through. So I'm making the line with that color, and then I'm just softening this down, because remember, I'm trying to preserve the foreground area. See how we can see the line through? We've got a couple options here. One, we can kind of scrub just lightly with our brush to try to kind of move the pigment in that layer around a little bit to soften it. And we can also take a little more of that pigment and just drop it in to make it a little darker to try to hide that. The other thing you can do if you're worried about that is just put less pigment there. It's okay. Or sorry, just don't go over the previous layer. Just design your hills or whatever it is so that you won't have to deal with that if you struggle with that kind of a thing. You're not used to taping off paper. And you don't have to tape off paper. I like to do it just because, especially in the middle of a sketchbook, I feel like it just creates kind of nice little lines and just makes it look nicer, but it is not a requirement. If you're working on a loose piece of paper, you do want to tape it down so that it will reduce the amount of buckling and just make things easier on you. And I usually tape it down to, let's see if I can find something. I've got a whole drawer of, this is the back of a sketchbook. So like anytime I finish a pad of paper, I keep that back cardboard piece and then I can tape it down to that. And then that means that I can move this to the side. I can also change the angles and I'm not working on it straight down. Yeah, watercolors on a regular canvas, not really. Watercolors don't really stick to the typical canvas that you would buy from Michaels that has primer on it. You can buy different things like watercolor ground to place on it where you can paint on it. An unprimed canvas, you can kind of paint watercolor on it because it will soak into some of the fibers. But that primed canvas, like what you'd buy at Michaels normally, it just kind of rejects it. All right, so again, I'm gonna dry this layer again because I don't know. Should I do a third layer of hills, or should I just stick with the two and then add the trees into the foreground? What do you guys think? Tons of watercolors, but you've been afraid to try. Well, welcome. That's what we do here, is we paint together. Oh no. Let's see. You guys are split. Another one. Okay, we'll do one more. Somebody says another one for learning. The paint I'm using on this top one is here. These are the set that I sell, had manufactured. I call them unicorn food, but I'm using the koi set on the bottom here. Okay, so I'm going to dry that layer of the hills. And if you are sensitive to noise, you might want to reduce the sound for about 10 to 15 seconds. In 3, 2, 1. All right, it is dry. Now, while we're here, actually, this might be a good thing to do to do another layer, because we've got a couple things happening here. If you notice this first layer I did up here, look how much smoother it looks. This one has some of those telltale signs of those back runs that we were talking about. And a couple things are happening here. Why is that happening? One, it doesn't necessarily mean it's bad, because sometimes that texture can look really interesting. But why is it happening? It's happening for a couple reasons. One, I'm not entirely sure I actually dried this previous layer super well. And so the paper is kind of like maybe the lower layers were still a little wet, and so it's introducing more of that water, which would introduce some of those back runs. The other thing is, as you layer darker and darker pigments on each other, the more layers, if you have any sort of colors that even have a slight amount of granulation, like even the most subtle, so a non-dye based color, you're going to start to get those with darker and darker layers as you kind of layer on a lot of pigment on top of each other. So it can just happen. The other thing is you saw me, I kind of had to keep messing with it. And the more you mess with it while it's still wet, the greater chance you're going to do some of those things. So it's okay though. We can work with it. We can work around it. We can hide it. We can do a lot of different things. So let's say you like this. Great. Then avoid it and make sure you can really see it. Let's say you're not crazy about it. Let's say you kind of want to hide some of it. I'm not saying you need to hide any of it, but just in case you do, I'm going to show you what I would do. So I'm going to take that same color. I need to add a little more water because it's kind of drying on its own. And this is going to lighten that color, but I think we can work with it. So I'm going to strategically place this next layer of hills to kind of fall over some of this and maybe butt up to some of it. And I gotta do some scrubbing to get that layer kind of in shape so that you can't see it so much. And let's just bring this hill down over here. Keep in mind when you add elements, you can be strategic about where you place them so that you can hide certain things. The layers can be helpful for hiding or highlighting. And add in a little more here just to try to hide that a little bit more. And there we go. We got a third layer of hills. Yeah, and everybody has different preferences. You might really like the texture, you might really not like the texture, and your answer is 100% valid. It's totally fine, whatever you prefer. Okay. This one is plenty dry. I'm going to let this one rest. We still need to add trees to this one, but I'm going to let it rest. And let's move back down to this one. This is the one I'm using the koi palette on. And we've got trees and water. So I think I'm going to start with the trees, and then we will add in the water. And for the water, we're going to be doing some brush control stuff, and we're also going to be doing a little bit of dry brushing. So there's a question, the starter watercolor set. No, those ones are manufactured. So I've got two. I've got two different sections on my website. I've got art supplies, which are things that I had made. And then there's a handmade section where I I make them literally on this desk here. And they have different effects. You can't get some of the same effects, you know, in a home type studio. They're going to be a little more granulating typically, and you've got a limited range of pigments that you can work with, or at least limited range of pigments that I'm willing to work with in my home studio, because some of the things that are, when they're dust, they're not very good for you. I mean, I do wear masks and things like that, but there are some that are extra, and I also don't want to put them in the water supply. So when I'm making my own, I try to use non-toxic supplies. But there's a time and place for both types of things. So, and I really like making the paint. It's fun, and they're fun to paint with too. All right, so we're gonna do some trees. We're gonna need some greens, but I want a really dark green. And I'm limited by the colors that we've been told we can use: blue, orange, and yellow. Thankfully, blue and orange, or blue and yellow, is going to give us a nice green color. Now, in this set, so this is Koi, and this is not my favorite set, but one of the reasons why I actually really like this set is the ultramarine color in here. Typically, I don't like ultramarine, but oh my goodness, that ultramarine in here is so stunning. Koi is almost worth buying just for the ultramarine. They do the best ultramarine I have ever seen. So I'm going to grab a bunch of that. And then I'm going to be adding in some of that yellow so I can get it to a green, and then we're going to kind of modify. So in between mixing colors, I'm going to wash my brush and then grab some of the other colors and mix that in. Now I chose kind of an interesting yellow there that actually muted it, which was kind of good. But they didn't play as nicely together as I wanted, which is a good thing to keep in mind. So let's do a little experiment. Because notice I took this yellow here, and it made more of a gray type color. If I add a little bit more, we'll get closer to a green, but it's still kind of a grayish color. When you're mixing colors, keep in mind, like if you're like, oh, why are my colors not looking quite right? Maybe you're using the wrong versions of colors. Any two, you know, a blue and a yellow, are not necessarily going to make a nice color. So let's try a different one. Let's use some of this. I think this is more the cerulean type blue. And then let's use this more golden yellow. This looks more like a medium yellow, and see what happens. See, we're going to get a completely different green color there. So keep that in mind. I'm going to kind of muck around with this one because I'm invested, and I'm mad that it went gray instead because I didn't really anticipate that. I should have, but I didn't. So let's keep mucking around with this one. I'm going to grab some of this cerulean. And let's add a little more of this. There we go. Now I want kind of a deep green color for these because I want it to be a little bit in shadow. So let's grab our little tester strip again. Ooh, that could be good. I'm going to go a little bit darker. So I'm just going to add a little more of that more cerulean type thing. Yeah, and if anybody is afraid to use their paints, I've been there. The best thing you can do is use your paints, because, you know, that's why you bought them. Okay, let's see what that color looks like. A little more saturation. Let's add in a teeny amount of this ultramarine and see what happens, because I want it to be a little darker. Just a little more. There we go. I like that. I'm gonna go with that. Okay, so we're gonna do cheater trees. We want kind of a horizon type thing. We're gonna have water in the foreground and we're gonna put some of these colors in. But the way I wanna do my trees, you could go in and paint individual trees, but if you wanna do cheater trees, you just wanna take a round brush with a nice tip and you're just gonna hold it kind of vertically and we're just going to tap. Just like that. I've got people telling me to add blue to yellow, add yellow to blue. All right, so I'm going to just tap and I'm going to vary the height of this. And I'm also going to, you might want to take a look at what's happening in your painting. To me, this is kind of where the sun is setting and I can create a bit of a focal point by making it go down around there, which is going to kind of help bring the eye and the focus there. So I'm going to, I'm going to start from this direction. You can start from any direction you want, but let's make this, I'm going to make this kind of high up here. Just tap and up. If you want to do different types of trees, that's totally fine. If you learn anything on this live, one of the things I'd like you to keep in mind is that you can do what you want with this, you know, make it, this is all just kind of a little exercise in experimentation. If you have different preferences, that is totally fine. Just tapping. Tapping as I go. So I mentioned I was going to make a bit of a little valley there. And I'm trying to kind of keep a wet area as I move across so that it doesn't dry too much. Just tapping and filling in. And then I'm going to make a more deliberate bottom to this. You could bring this around. The other thing I'm going to do now is, because this is going to be water, and we need to kind of soften this, I'm going to wash my brush and I'm going to very lightly soften kind of at the bottom, so it's just going to bleed into it just a little bit. I don't want it to bleed in too much because we don't want too much green in that water, but we want a little bit. All right, so we have softened the bottom and we don't have a ton of that kind of reflecting in. We do want the reflection in the water to have a little bit of this, so I'm going to just kind of tap my brush off so I have just a teeny tiny amount of this in my brush, and I'm just going to kind of soften this along the edges here just to kind of create a little bit of the reflection there. And then I'm going to let that dry because we're going to build up that water with adding in some more texture, some more of the colors that are seen throughout the rest of the painting. We're going to do some dry brushing and a little bit of like really small ripple making. And then we're going to move back up to this one. So this is, we got to make trees with this one too. And this one we had green, purple, and blue. So we can actually use the green colors. And I'm going to actually, this is the one where I had my dark green. I'm going to add my greens to this, which is going to keep it a little bit darker, and it'll also kind of keep it in the color scheme of it. So we're moving back up to that top painting. So I'm gonna take a little bit of both of these. A little bit of this one. This in my palette is Key Lime Pie. It's kind of like a yellow green. And then this is like an army green. I call it guacamole in my palette, because I like guacamole. And I'm going to get my little tester strip here. We want this to be pretty dark. So I'm actually going to add some blues to it to keep it even darker. I'll take a little bit of that phthalo-esque blue, and I need to add a little more water because they're drying out. So the bird made it up part of the way, and then he turned around and flew the wrong direction. So yes, I am convinced because he made it halfway up. He has the ability to get up, but his little brain is struggling to figure out how to go the other way. If he can't figure it out, I'll put a little like ladder or something down in there. Added a little more blue to my green, and that might be kind of a nice color. I'm going to add a little bit more of this. I just want to bump up the pigment just a bit more. And a little bit more of that blue. Maybe even a little bit more. Oh, he's facing in the right direction. You got this, buddy. You got it. Up one. Keep going. Keep going. Hello and welcome to Motivational Bird Talk, where I talk to birds on TikTok. All right, there we go. That's the color I want. I'm sorry, I feel like I did not talk through that color very well because I was very distracted by this little baby bird. He's looking in the right direction, and he made it up. 1, 2, oh, get to the third one. Oh no, he turned around. He went to jump and then just turned around. Shoot. Okay. All right, so I'm going to do basically the same thing on this one. Now, you could, if you wanted to, we could just put big trees in, but I'd rather do that with, when I add big trees in that have a bunch of texture, I actually like to do that with pen, so it covers all the layers and we can't see it through. So I'm just going to do this basically in the same way. Again, we want this layer to be dry. If you do this when it's not dry, it is going to kind of make all the tops fuzzy, which isn't necessarily what you want. But yeah, so I'm just going to do this and I'm going to work in the opposite direction. Just tap. Tippy tappies. Vary the heights as you go along. I'm going to bring that up a little bit more. It's looking a little bit too normal. And you want to continually bring that wet area with you so it doesn't dry off too much. Just tap. Tap, tap, tap. I'm going to risk going above over here. I think my color might be dark enough to kind of hide that transition. And this is supposed to be a night type sky, so we want to make sure that this stays nice and dark because you'd barely be able to see some of the colors if you're thinking it's too green. Now, I'm a little bit beholden to the dice because they told me I had to have green. If I were painting this, I would make it even darker so that you'd barely be able to tell it was green, and it would be more of kind of a blackish green color. But I want to make sure we can actually see the green in this since it's what it said. Now, a final touch, and if you don't have the supplies for this, this is totally fine, but since it is a night sky, I'm going to grab a little gouache pen. I can find it. You could also do this with metallic watercolors, but I'm going to put a few little stars in there just to kind of the talk. Where is my white gouache pen? Of course I cannot find it. Oh, there it is. I got this new organizer thing that fits under my desk and I love it, but my brain is still used to things being where they used to be. So I'm going to add in a couple little stars, and on some I'm just going to kind of tap, tap and spin to make little stars, and on some of them I'm going to make kind of a bigger dot and then flick up and down so it looks like it's twinkling a little bit. Just kind of flicking. And that'll make it seem a little bit more like it's actually the night. There we go. Now it's night. Hooray, we did it. Hello, hello. So for like 90% of what I paint, I use a size 10 or 12 brush. With watercolor, specifically. Okay, so we need to finish off this one now too. And water is our last thing. We did kind of soften the bottom here to get a little of the reflection of that green in. But we want to reflect some of these other colors in there too. And I want to make sure this is dry. I think it's dry enough. If yours is not dry, take a moment to dry it. We're going to practice dry brushing. If you are struggling with water and getting some texture, but you don't want to like overdo it, one of the things about water that I see people do is overworking. Leaving things to the imagination is what's going to actually look. If you do a little bit too much, it's going to take it past the point of like where your imagination's like, oh yes, that's water. In general, I want everybody to be part of the too much club because the too much club is fun where we do too much on everything. But sometimes you need to learn when to walk away. You gotta know when to show them and know when to fold them. You know what I mean? All right, but we're gonna be working on dry brushing, and this is gonna work better if you have a more textured type paper. If you have a cold, or if you've got a hot press paper, it's not gonna work as well because your bristles aren't gonna catch on some of the texture of the paper. Let me get a little tester strip so I can show you this. Okay, so what we're gonna be doing is we're gonna take some of these colors and reflect them through. I unfortunately got rid of my blue. I shouldn't have done that, but I'm gonna grab a little bit of blue, really light. And then rather than taking all that's in there, you want to actually tap this off onto like a paper towel or something. Tap, tap, tap. So that you have just a little bit in, and then you can kind of just dry brush and see how it's going to. I should have used a darker color to demonstrate this. Hold on. I don't want this to be darker in my actual painting, but I want you guys to be able to see this a little better. See how we can kind of, by lightly, it's going to grab the texture of the paper. If you want to practice this, I made a Father's Day card where we made nachos, the collage stuff, and we did some dry brushing. But we're going to be doing that in the foreground here. So I'm going to lighten this, and I'm going to start by kind of adding in the color of the water with that dry brushing. And I'm going to mainly focus this down closer to me because we want to do a couple things here. These are all really subtle things. It's going to move pretty fast. And I will have to dry after I do the dry brushing so I can do the second part. But we're kind of using perspective here. As things are closer to us, we're going to get more detailed. Oh no, little birdie. I am going to have to make a bird ladder after this because he cannot figure it out. There's going to be more texture closer to us. It's going to be smaller and less texture the further away. But the best way to do water is to just kind of mimic some of the movement that might be in it. So I'm going to take some of this bluish color. I'm going to add a little more water to my brush so it dilutes it. Then I'm going to tap this off. Tap, tap, tap. It's damp. And now I'm just going to really lightly on... I don't know how well you can see this, but it really picked up the texture of the paper there, and that already ends up making it look more like water, at least in person. I don't think you guys can see it that much. It's a really subtle color on the video. Now I'm going to do the same thing with some of those other colors, especially I want a little bit of this kind of orangey type glow. So I'm going to wash my brush, grab a little bit of this orange that I had previously mixed up down here. And again, we're going to tap, 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 get most of that off. And I'm kind of mimicking where it is here too. So let's go this direction. Whoa. It's kind of nerve-wracking. We're just adding in a little bit of that there. And let's do the same thing with that yellow. I got a little bit in my brush. Tap, tap, tap it off. And right there. Need a little bit more. I want it to reflect right there. Next, I'm going to grab my hairdryer again. So again, if you are sensitive to noise, I'm going to be turning this on to dry this layer in 3, 2, and 1. That didn't take much because I didn't actually add much water or anything on there. The next thing I'm going to do is a couple things. We have some blue at our disposal, so I'm going to take some of this green and I'm going to darken this with some of that green. And I am going to make a bit of a horizon line just to kind of separate the two. You don't have to do this, but sometimes I like to do this where I just kind of put a little bit of a separation here. It can kind of just help make it feel a little bit more separate. Totally not required though. Maybe even just pick that up just a little bit. And then I'm going to take some of those colors and we're going to, again, we want some of that color in our brush, but we don't want too much because we want to make really thin little lines. So maybe tap it off and we're just going to add in some texture here, just with little tiny strokes, making sure to leave space in between those strokes. I'm going to do the same thing with that orange color. Again, I'm kind of tapping it off so I don't have too much in my brush. This might be a little too bright. Yeah, that's a little too bright. So I'm going to add a little water into my brush. And just making some little lines. A lot of these don't touch. Being really light with the pressure I'm placing. Leaving a lot to the imagination. I'm going to do the same thing with the blue, and I'm also going to do the same thing with the green. See how I'm kind of reflecting where those colors are within this? And let's do the same thing with that greenish color. Put it in my brush, tap it off, maybe even put a little water in my brush to kind of dilute what's in there. And then adding in some little reflections. And I'm actually going to leave mine there. I could keep doing this and I think we could maybe improve it a little bit, but it does get to the point where it's like a law of diminishing returns when working on the water. I do try to upload these to YouTube if they will download. So I did try to, I think I uploaded the last one, but the one before I did try to also upload and it didn't work. So I'm kind of at the mercy of whether or not TikTok saves it correctly. But yes, there is a way for the most part. All right, so I'm gonna remove the tape now, and let's see how everything looks. Because once you remove the tape, something happens. It's like you get extra credit or something. I don't know. And be careful when you're removing tape. You can easily rip paper. This paper doesn't seem to rip as much as other papers, so I'm not as careful, and washi tape has less adhesive in it. And there we go. So both of these little paintings were made, the dice decided, and then we worked with what it gave us. I'm going to date this so that I like to date when I do the my little paintings. So it's the 18th, right? Yeah. there we go. All right, everyone, I'm going to go try to save this little bird and then maybe get to go see my grandma's new puppy. So I hope everybody has a really good day, and I will be doing another live in 2 weeks. I might hop on again sooner to play with some of the handmade ones. I did send everybody's order out last week, so maybe next weekend I will come on and we'll do some playing with those if people are interested. I also have to see kind of what my schedule is, but I hope you had a ton of fun. I had fun doing this. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today, and I will see you guys again soon. Thank you, thank you, thank you.